A ballerina's perspective, from performing with New York City Ballet and Alvin Ailey American Dance Theater to publishing poetry books and mentoring kids and teens. Join us in a weekly discussion with experts to gain mental health clarity and achieve growth in moral consciousness. Give our show a 5 stars, comment, share, and come along for the ride. Welcome to the Growth, Grace, and Gratitude podcast, where we talk about all things mental health, wellness, positive psychology, entrepreneurial tips, business tips, and so much more. Today, we will talk a little bit about the mental health journey of veterans and addiction recovery with Garret Biss, a retired Marine Corps pilot, addiction recovery coach, and TED speaker. Post-retirement in 2015, Garret confronted challenges common among veterans: anxiety, depression, and a sense of displacement. Turning to alcohol as a crutch, it wasn't until suicidal ideation took hold that he sought change. Rather than traditional addiction treatments, Garret's path was shaped by mentoring that emphasized self-worth, rediscovering identity, and tapping into inherent strengths. In 2017, he co-founded an addiction recovery residence in North Carolina and crafted a recovery program and curriculum deeply rooted in positive psychology and the principles of human flourishing. A graduate of the Clark School of Engineering at the University of Maryland and holding a master's from the Harvard Business School at Auburn University, Garret's spirit of service soars beyond recovery. He's a pilot for the Civil Air Patrol and helms a global water nonprofit 1 Million Goal Incorporated. As an award-winning author, co-founder of a recovery residence, and a captivating speaker, Garret consistently leaves audiences inspired, bolstered in self-worth, and imbued with a newfound sense of purpose. So wow, what a beautiful bio, and what an amazing thing you're doing for our veterans. So thank you so much for coming on the podcast and sharing your story.
Yeah, thank you so much for this opportunity. I'm grateful and excited to be here.
Yes, of course. And it's so cool that today is actually National Prayer Day and National Loyalty Day. And this is recognizing our freedoms as Americans. And this is such a beautiful way to honor veterans, to remember, to reflect on our heritage and the freedoms that we have. So that's a beautiful alignment.
Yeah, great for pointing that out.
I love how you mentioned that you're emphasizing on the self-worth aspect and rediscovering identity. Can you explain a little bit about why that is so important during recovery, especially when it comes to veterans and their journey?
Yeah, certainly. So in general, and I don't know how philosophical or deep we want to get, but I have a kind of generalized theory of all mental health challenges, human suffering, and it really, if there was one simplified way to think about or explain it, at least the way I understand it, I believe that most, if not all, of our suffering or the experiences that we have, mental health wise, personal, interpersonal wise, stems from a deviation or a separation from our authentic self. Now, that can mean a lot of different things and show up in a lot of different ways. But what I found in my experience, and then my experience as a coach and kind of studying some of the challenges that individuals face, is that a lot of the pain and suffering is either created by or exacerbated by individuals showing up in an inauthentic way. So what does that look like? It looks like us showing up as a version of ourselves, hoping that will be accepted, hoping that will be enough, either enough for society at large by following societal expectations and doing the things that you feel you're supposed to do, or whether it's showing up inauthentically in relationships by hiding parts of ourselves, maybe hiding ambitions, desires, maybe hiding fears or hiding parts of our past that we're afraid would jeopardize the connections that we seek. And at the end of the day, humans were hardwired for connection. It's if not one of, it's the most fundamental basic human need for emotional well-being that we have. We need a sense of connection. We need to be part of a tribe. We need to be, have that sense of belonging. And without it, it can spark or foster a lot of unhealthy experiences or expressions of ourselves that lead us into a lot of the pain and the suffering. So to answer that, a long way to answer your question, but this is why self-worth and positive self-identity are so crucial for an individual in a journey in mental health and recovery, or just into that state of flourishing and really enjoying a full expression of their life. it's very important that we plug into the strengths that we do have, the inherent value that we do have. I mean, there's many different things. For one, we're hardwired for survival, first and foremost. So a lot of the ways that we see things or perceive things or remember things, a lot of the decisions that we make, it's really first and foremost a survival related decision. So what does that mean for the ruminating thoughts that we have and the things that are always on our mind? We tend to give more weight to or remember negative things about us or about our past much more than we are naturally inclined to remember good things about us or positive things about our past. Because if we make a mistake, if we, if we betray somebody, if we let somebody down, if we don't follow through, anything that we've done in our past that we wish we could have done differently or would have done differently, these could be threats to our future if we repeat them. So instead of repeating these things and having a cost in the future, I believe this is why we have that natural tendency to remember all the mistakes that we made, really focus on the things that we don't like about ourselves or the ways that we feel like we're falling short or not showing up fully, because these can be potential threats to our survival. However, whenever we have a great win or we, somebody compliments something about us, or maybe we recognize one of our own strengths in accomplishing a project or putting forth, some good effort or creating something beautiful, that's not going to be a threat to our future. So very quickly we tend to discount that and then move our attention back to those kind of challenging things. And anybody who's been in a really dark mental health journey or struggles with substances or addiction, there's plenty of things to ruminate over that, regrets, mistakes, shame, guilt, all of these things. There's plenty of things to kind of carry forward. And if we don't focus on addressing that and alleviating some of the pain that comes from that by helping somebody reconnect with the inherent strengths that they have and reconnect with the self-worth that they have by giving themselves credit for many of the wins that they've had in the past and helping them identify their strengths, not just their weaknesses, that's a crucial kind of step in creating that foundation for somebody to do better and get to a better place.
Wow, that's a really fantastic answer. And when it comes to like building on that self-worth, what are some strategies or techniques that you can share to offer some kind of guidance, like proactive guidance for them, or just for anybody to do?
Yeah, that's a great question. So really the way that we see and do and operate down to our level of beliefs, the values that we have, the habits, the tendencies that we have, really every way that we show up is simply a byproduct of the experiences that we've had in our life and the training or the conditioning that we've had along the way. So I say this because it can be natural to have a negative leaning inclination toward the thoughts that you have, the hard time that you give yourself. This can be a natural inclination. Fortunately, with some intention and with some practice, we can retrain ourselves, or we can develop, a revised conditioning that can lead us more naturally to a place where we feel better about ourselves and our circumstances. As I mentioned, we have this natural inclination to often remember negative things from our past or negative things about us. With some intention, we can develop or start doing some practices to kind of rewire that or to develop a new habit. So one of the simplest things that I typically do when I'm meeting with somebody or a new client is I'll ask them to create a list of 100 wins and successes they've had in their life. And the typical response is like deer in the headlights. They're like, what are you talking about? I'm like 30, I'm 40 years old. I haven't had 100 wins and successes. And for me, that's a litmus test of where their focus is and how bad of a place they are mentally, because I don't care how many mistakes you've made in the past or how old you are. If you're 10 years old, you've had more than 100 or more than 1,000 wins and successes in your life, especially if we're giving ourselves credit or willing to recognize wins and successes that are as insignificant in the grand scheme of things as a mistake that we made that we're willing to carry over our heads for many months or years to come. So a simple exercise, sitting down, writing a list of 100 wins and successes. And if you got to start small, then say, hey, I learned how to crawl, learn how to walk, I learned how to chew food, learn how to ride a bike. I got an A in the first grade, passed that hard exam in 8th grade. Like if that's where we got to start, then let's start there and let's kind of continue working on that list. What a lot of people will find is after 30 or 40, it gets to be a little bit easier, and then the juices start flowing and they get excited about it and they start filling out that list. But if we can't even do a simple exercise like that, and that's an incredibly powerful way to start. So that's with really kind of giving ourselves some credit for the wins and successes. Let's balance out that scale of what's on our awareness and where our focus is, so that we can give ourselves credit for where it's due, especially if we're going to continue to carry the shame and the guilt and the self-doubt, or the frustrations about things in our past. So that's a great first step. Another thing that I really encourage individuals to do is focus on, learn what are your inherent strengths. We all have inherent weaknesses. We all have inherent strengths. Unfortunately, most of us are more keen to the weaknesses that we have because we live life trying to navigate the certain weaknesses. If you feel like you're bad at math, if you feel like you're bad at writing, bad at reading, bad at public speaking, you tend to navigate your life so that those weaknesses don't become a threat. How many of us, and how often do we sit down and think about the strengths that we have and own these inherent strengths so that they're available to us when the next obstacle or challenge or struggle comes up? We can call on our strengths, not just try to navigate life by avoiding our weaknesses. But these are two fundamental things that were shared with me early on that really started to create that shift. And I felt really start putting me back in control of my own life. Instead of feeling like the locus of control of my own life was beyond me or outside of me, and I was merely here to react or respond to everything else that was dictating how my life would turn out, this little shift in mindset helped put me back in the driver's seat and helped me feel like I could take control of my life. Instead of the next obstacle or challenge or setback, instead of me having to be reactionary and try to think, okay, how can I navigate this for my survival? It afforded me an opportunity to think, okay, what are the strengths that I've demonstrated in the past? And how can I leverage some of those strengths to find a solution to this problem, or to navigate to a better place? And this was, you mentioned in the introduction, a lot of my work is focused on applied positive psychology, which is really a focus on inherent strengths, inherent worth, and helping individuals find and leverage what is right with them so that they can get to a better place in their life. And that's opposite of, kind of the traditional thing that we think of when we think of psychology or mental health professionals, who are typically trained and very good at helping individuals identify what's wrong with them from the symptoms that are showing up, or how, certain ways that they're struggling, and then doing some great work to help mitigate that downward pull so they can get back to a better place. But from this perspective, it's kind of easy to see, at least in my eyes, how both of these approaches can be very complementary in nature. Let's not just try to remove the bad. If we want the most beautiful garden, we don't just want to pull out the weeds. We also want to plant some beautiful plants or vegetables or crops that we want to grow in that garden.
That's really amazing. And it just reminds me of like reparenting the inner child. A lot of my work is doing inner child healing and connecting with ballet and the arts, but also mindfulness. And oftentimes, so many of my clients come to me and just want to reconnect with their pure inner child self, because that's the core of their joy. Right. And we do a lot of positive affirmations, mantras, journaling, and things that actually activate that mindfulness, that like you mentioned, positive psychology that you do. It's so big and it's so important. And I think it's one of the best ways to realign the mindset and also start to slowly but surely rewire the nervous system from fight or flight to a more calm and centered space. Because I feel like that essence of positive reinforcement, it's focusing on the good, and then you kind of get rewarded. And that energy flip is a complete paradigm shift, because we're now changing our psyche and subconscious to be able to respond rather than react, and to things that holds more value than not. So it's such a beautiful part of healing, especially when people are going through addiction, as a lot of us have addiction personality types. So when we're going through challenges or different difficulties, we cling onto something, or we start to go down the rabbit hole of dark thoughts or toxic behavioral patterns, and we need that support and that awareness to be like, we can get out of it, we can help ourselves. If you're ready to shake off that daily stress, come join us for online beginner adult ballet and yoga classes each week to connect with the flow of movement and the art of ballet into perfect synergy. Come as you are and learn to love your body a little bit more and gain strength and flexibility with each class, All are welcome. Sign up at balletartsmovement@gmail.com. First class free. TeleVital supports focus, energy, immunity, sleep, recovery, and resilience. Start feeling better today on a cellular level with zeolite, super green juice, micronutrient gut support, and more. Get over 50% off your first order for TeleVital. Link in the description of the podcast. Sanger Daniel's online seminar promoting a positive message of self-healing with bioenergy work together with live seminars and remote coaching. Use code BIO20 for a 20% discount for our audience. Link in the description of the podcast. And the idea of community you mentioned, it's so true, having community back you up and be there for you. It's so important, and especially for some practical advice for veterans struggling with the transition. Can you offer some of that?
Yeah, absolutely. But first, I just want to comment. So you talked about inner child work, and I mean that's so important. And this really comes back to kind of the first comment that I made about like all of the suffering and all of the struggle stemming from an inauthenticity. And I think the both are extremely related, because from my understanding and experience, that inauthenticity is a path that we go down when some part of us, whether it's our inner child or some emotional memory of something that happened when we were a child, we had an experience that taught us that we weren't lovable and acceptable just as we are, and we need to show up as a different version of ourselves in order to be acceptable or okay. So a lot of the pain that we have and a lot of the behaviors that show up later in life is all kind of stemming from that initial core wound, or that harm that was done to us as a child and still lingers in that inner child that we carry with us. So that I love that that's your focus, because it's so important. And again, like anything that we can do, if there's two roads that we can travel, and one is the road of inauthenticity that we're doing for our survival and trying to navigate via other people's expectations, and the other road is our authentic self, anything that we can do to kind of merge those two roads back together, I think is the pathway to, more happiness, more joy, and a more fulfilling life for everybody. And I think, this is kind of reflected in a lot of different philosophies or approaches. I mean, I'm certainly not a theologian by any means, but when I hear, become more like a child, in the Christian text, that's what I'm thinking there. That's what I feel like the message is, like, become more like that person that knew that you were lovable and acceptable just as you are before you got hurt, before you forgot that, or before you had experiences that taught you otherwise. And then in Central America and a lot of the more ancient traditions, that's where a lot of the work or the focus is on. They talk about, what was that initial core wound that separated us from our true self when we came here as a physical being to have this experience in this physical body as an energetic being. What was that experience that happened that the first time that told us that somehow you're not lovable and acceptable just as you are? And if we can figure out where that happened and kind of merge our two realities or our two selves back together, that's where the truest healing comes from. And then, and if you're talking about bad mental health challenges, or you're talking about struggles with substances and behaviors, I understand those struggles. And you kind of alluded to this. I completely agree that all of us find some way, or there's some level of addictive behavior in all of us. I don't think that only some people struggle with addiction and other people don't. And really what led me to this understanding is a beautiful definition of what addiction is, that was offered by Dr. Gabor Mate. He says that addiction manifests in any behavior that a person craves, finds temporary relief or pleasure in, has a negative consequence because of it, and yet has difficulty giving it up. I love it because that perfectly explains somebody who has a substance addiction. There's this behavior that they crave. They typically crave it because there's some pain inside of them that they want to avoid, escape, or numb. It also is the same for somebody who has, some symptoms of some mental health challenges. Maybe their behavior that they're craving is just kind of the negative self-talk and the negative rumination, and a lot of the thoughts and behaviors that come up as a result of it. Or they have some more socially acceptable addiction. Maybe they just disengage from their life and get sucked into social media or streaming channels online. It's still a behavior that's creating a negative consequence if it's keeping them from living the full expression of their life. And yet if we don't get to the root of where that pain is coming from, where this propensity or this desire to create, to numb comes from, then we're only kind of masking a problem and kind of moving forward in life. So however it represents or however expresses for any individual, it's beautiful if we can help individuals navigate a path back to, back to their authenticity through their inner child work, through their behaviors, through their mindset, whatever that looks like. It's a great path to get to. So and now your question about any advice for veterans. So really my biggest message for veterans is the one I shared last year in my TEDx talk, and it talks about the unspoken trauma that all veterans face. And the big takeaway I want all veterans to understand from this is, first and foremost, know that without a doubt, you're going to go through some very significant and challenging intrapersonal situations or problems or suffering as you transition out of the military. A lot of people, this catches them off guard. I know that I wasn't prepared for it. Nobody really told me. I thought it would be a little awkward and maybe I'd have to, figure out what it's like to go get a civilian job and operate in the civilian world. I realized it was going to be a challenge. I didn't realize how much internal suffering was going to come with it. So first and foremost, I just want veterans who are about to, or, service members who are about to transition out, to have a little bit more of an understanding of what that process looks like, so that they aren't caught off guard. Because I think one of the biggest challenges is when we find ourselves in a dark place or in some kind of suffering or discomfort, and we don't know how we got there. Because if we don't understand how we got there, then it can be really hard to have any kind of hope that things are going to get better and we'll be able to kind of move beyond it. I often say, if you or I were to go out for a really hard workout and really strain our body and really stress our muscles, if we were sore for the next couple of days, that would make sense to us. We'd understand why. And because we knew why we were sore, at no time would we think, oh my gosh, the rest of my life is going to feel like this. What have I done? We'd know that, okay, that's a process and things are going to get better as our body heals and strengthens. If you were to wake up one morning and find yourself in that same soreness or even excruciating pain, if you'd pulled a muscle or did some kind of damage and you had no idea where it came from, it can be really hard to have that hope or that understanding that things are going to get better. And then what I've come to understand is the root of that challenge, and why I call the transition from military service, I understand it really as a traumatic experience, is because the way that we have come as service members to meet our basic human emotional needs, those needs for connection, the needs for that permission to be authentic, and the needs for a sense of meaning in our life, the way that we've come to meet those needs throughout our service is taken away from us. So naturally there's going to be a lot of challenge that comes from that. And if you think about, a lot of service members, they'll enter their service when they're 18, maybe 22 years old. What we're knowing now about brain development, about identity development, that's still occurring, even up until the mid to late 20s for a lot of individuals. So an entire member's entire understanding of themselves and their role and their value is all really developed or continues to be refined at that time that they're in the service. So the person that they're knowing themselves to be is going to shift or be a different reflection when they transition out. So that's the biggest advice I have. And if anybody wants to check out that TEDx talk, you can just type in unspokentrauma.vet and you can watch about 10 minutes. So for any veterans that might be struggling with something internally, I think it's a really helpful message. For anybody who knows or loves a veteran, if you want to better understand some of the challenges that they're going through, it can also be very, very helpful for that.
That's amazing. That's so fantastic. You explain that all so well.
Yeah, I think some of the same things that we do to help repair and heal are great preventative measures. So again, understanding the value of this mindset that recognizes our worth and our strengths. And don't create a situation or don't allow yourself to be in a situation where all of your value and all of your self-worth is defined by how others perceive you. That's a natural inclination that we can have, especially in our society, as there's so much pressure for us to think of our own value in terms of how it compares to others or how valuable we feel as how we're received by others. So understanding that, I think it can be easier to see why it's so important to develop some daily practices to care for our mental health, to really care for and develop a strong mindset that can carry us through some challenges that we have. And again, this comes back to recognizing some of the wins and successes that we've had. You can do it once in a long list form, and then also just thinking about those things. If you have any kind of journaling or gratitude practice or some kind of reflective exercise at the end of the day, make sure that if you're going to acknowledge some things that you're working on or some things that you want to fix or clean up in your life, make sure you're also including some credit for the way that you are showing up and some of the things that you're proud of or that you have done well. And when we can do this and continue to give ourselves credit for the value that we do have, this does a great job of building up that emotional resilience for future hard and challenging times. And it can also be a very quick path from that struggle back to a more grounded place and a more centered place.
That's so beautiful. And for the civilians who are wanting to help veterans and to do their civic duty, they do also partake in the veteran healing journey and participate as well.